A fist from my son-in-law, hair pulled by the daughter I gave birth to, all for $3 million. But they didn't know they weren't beating down a week-old woman. They had just ignited a storm that no one in this family could stop. They thought I'd crawl away, broken and defeated. They thought wrong, because when your own blood betrays you for money, when the child you raised turns predator, that's when you discover what you're truly made of. And me? I was made of steel they never saw coming. My name is Cora Matthews, and at 72, I thought I knew what family meant. Widowed for 5 years now. I'd spent most of my life surrounded by books and silence as the head librarian at Jefferson Archives Center. When retirement finally came, the quiet of my empty house became too loud, echoing with memories of my late husband, Harold. That's when Elaine, my only daughter, suggested I move in with her and Richard. "Mom, it's ridiculous for you to be rattling around in that big house all alone," she'd said during one of our Sunday phone calls. "We have plenty of room, and the grandkids would love having you here." The promise of daily life with my grandchildren made my heart soar. I'd missed so much while buried in my work, always cataloging other people's histories while my own family grew distant. This felt like a second chance. Their home in Wilmington, North Carolina, sat like a Victorian dream along the Cape Fear River. 3 stories of weathered brick and gingerbread trim, with a wraparound porch that whispered of gentler times. When I first arrived that September afternoon, arms full of photo albums and my mother's china, Elaine had rushed down the front steps, her auburn hair, so like mine once was, catching the sun. "Welcome home, Mom," she'd said, and I'd believed her. The first weeks were everything I'd hoped for. I taught 10-year-old Emma how to make my mother's apple pie, the kitchen filled with cinnamon and laughter. 8-year-old Marcus would curl up beside me in the library, listening to stories about the historical documents I'd preserved. Even Richard seemed welcoming, helping me arrange my bedroom furniture and installing a grab bar in the bathroom, just in case. We established routines that felt like healing. Tuesday dinners became my domain. Pot roast or fried chicken, the recipes Harold had loved. Elaine would pour wine. Richard would carve, and we'd sit around their massive oak table like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. I'd share stories from the archives, about the love letters from the Civil War I'd cataloged, or the time I discovered a map that changed our understanding of the town's founding. "You should write these down, Cora," Richard had said one evening, raising his glass to me. "Family history is important." But slowly, like termites in wood, something began eating away at our foundation. It started with small comments, innocent enough that I dismissed them. "Mom, we should probably talk about adding you to our household expenses," Elaine mentioned one morning over coffee, just to be fair to Richard. Then came the questions about my finances. "How's your retirement account doing?" Richard would ask casually. "This economy, have you thought about consolidating your investments?" By November, what had been warmth turned tepid. The dinner invitations grew sporadic. I'd find myself eating alone in the kitchen while they dined in the formal dining room, their voices carrying through the walls but not including me. When I'd join them in the living room, conversations would halt mid-sentence. "We were just discussing some financial planning," Elaine would say, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Nothing you need to worry about." But I did worry. At night, lying in bed in what they now called the mother-in-law suite, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder when I'd become a burden instead of a blessing. When my daughter's face began to show impatience instead of love, when Richard's helpful gestures started feeling like calculations. The house that had promised warmth now felt cold despite the Carolina humidity. I noticed things. Papers moved on my desk, my filing cabinet slightly ajar, though I always locked it. My medication bottles not quite where I'd left them. Small violations that made me feel paranoid, old, uncertain. "I think someone's been in my room," I mentioned to Elaine one December morning. She'd laughed, but it sounded sharp. "Mom, who would go in your room? You probably just forgot. It happens at your age." At my age, as if 72 meant senile, as if decades of organizing and preserving precise historical records meant nothing. I'd kept my mind sharp with crosswords and reading, my body healthy with morning walks along the river. But in my daughter's eyes, I saw myself diminishing, becoming not a person, but a problem to be solved. That night, as I listened to them talking in hushed tones downstairs, I heard my name followed by numbers: savings, insurance, power of attorney. The words floated up like smoke signals, warning of a fire I was only beginning to smell. I pulled my grandmother's quilt up to my chin, the one made from scraps of family clothing going back generations. Each square told a story: a piece of my mother's wedding dress, my father's work shirt, Elaine's baby blanket. This was supposed to be about family, about belonging, about coming full circle. Instead, lying in that beautiful house by the river, I began to understand that I hadn't come home at all. I'd walked into a trap, and the hunters wore familiar faces. The mask finally slipped on a Thursday morning in January. I came down to find Elaine at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet printed out, receipts scattered like evidence at a crime scene. "Mom, we need to talk about your contribution to the household," she said, not looking up from her calculator. My contribution? I poured myself coffee with hands that barely trembled. I thought I was family, not a tenant. "Don't be dramatic." She pushed a paper toward me. "I've itemized everything, your share of utilities, groceries, the cleaning service, property taxes. It comes to $1,800 a month." I stared at the paper. She'd charged me for a third of their gardener, their pool maintenance, a pool I'd never used, even a wear and tear fee for the furniture. "Elaine, I buy groceries every week. I cook." "Those Tuesday dinners? Mom, that doesn't cover daily expenses." Her voice carried that patronizing tone I'd started to hate. "Richard and I have discussed it. This is more than fair." Fair? As if love came with a price tag. As if the woman who'd spent 36 hours in labor bringing her into this world now owed her rent. But I wrote the check. What else could I do? The financial invasion escalated. Richard started appearing in my room unannounced, always with an excuse. Just checking the heating vent, Cora, or thought I heard something. One afternoon, I caught him at my desk, my bank statement in his hands. "What are you doing?" I kept my voice steady, though rage burned in my chest. He didn't even flinch. "Elaine asked me to help you organize. Elderly people often miss fraudulent charges." "Elderly people? Not Cora, not Mom, just another old woman to be managed." "I've been managing my finances since before you were born," I said, taking the statement from him. "I'll ask if I need help." He shrugged, smiled that salesman's smile I'd grown to distrust. "Sure thing. But Cora, you really should consider giving Elaine power of attorney, just as a precaution." That night, I changed every password I had, but paranoia crept in like fog. I'd find my reading glasses in the kitchen when I knew I'd left them on my nightstand. My pills seemed rearranged, though the count was right. Small gaslights, each one making me question myself. "Mom, you left the stove on again," Elaine would say, though I hadn't cooked that day. "I found your purse in the garden," Richard would announce, producing it with a concerned frown, though I distinctly remembered hanging it in the closet. They were building a case, brick by subtle brick, the concerned daughter, the helpful son-in-law, the declining mother who needed supervision. I started documenting everything in a journal, hiding it inside a hollowed-out book, an old librarian's trick: times, dates, incidents, evidence of my sanity in an increasingly insane situation. The breaking point came in early February. I'd returned from my morning walk to find them in my room, Richard on my computer, Elaine going through my filing cabinet. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Elaine turned, not even pretending to look guilty. "Mom, you left your computer logged into your bank account. Anyone could have accessed it. We're trying to protect you." "Get out!" And my voice shook, but not from frailty. "Both of you, get out of my room!" "Mom, you're being irrational. This behavior concerns us." "My behavior?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're breaking into my private papers, accessing my accounts, and I'm the one with behavior issues?" Richard stood, my financial portfolio in his hands. "Cora, You have significant assets that aren't properly managed. 3 million in various accounts just sitting there. In this economy. How dare you? The words came out low, dangerous. How dare you go through my private information? It's for your own good, Elaine said, but her eyes were on the portfolio. Not on me. Someone could take advantage of you. Someone is, I said. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there. 3 people who'd shared Thanksgiving dinner just months ago, now adversaries in an undeclared war. Elaine's face hardened. I think you need to see a doctor. Mom, this paranoia, these accusations, it's not like you. No, I agreed. It's not like me to see my daughter for what she really is. That night, I heard them arguing. Phrases drifted up through the floorboards. Taking too long. Need legal standing. Before she changes anything. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Finally understanding the full scope of their plan. I wasn't a mother here. I wasn't family. I was a mark, a target, a problem to be solved and a fortune to be claimed. They'd invited me here not for love, but for access. Not for family dinners, but for financial documents. Every kindness had been a key, trying to unlock my vault of a lifetime's careful savings. I thought of Harold, how hard we'd worked, how carefully we'd saved. For our retirement, he'd always said, for our daughter's inheritance. He'd never imagined that inheritance would be hunted like prey while I still breathed. At 2:45 a.m., I made my decision. If they wanted to play predator and prey, they'd chosen the wrong target. I might be 72, but I'd spent decades preserving history. Now it was time to make some of my own. The next morning, I became someone they'd never met, a strategist in bedroom slippers, a general planning war over Earl Grey tea. At the library, I'd preserved other people's histories. Now I would preserve my own future. First, the passwords. Not just changed, but completely overhauled with phrases they'd never guess. Harold/Laugh 2024 for the main account. Not your ATM_Elaine for the retirement fund. Petty? Perhaps, but pettiness felt like armor. I took my morning walk, but detoured to the FedEx store, where I rented a private mailbox, then to the bank, where I spoke with Mrs. Patterson, who'd known me for 20 years. I need to add additional security to all my accounts, I told her quietly. Verbal passwords, callbacks for any access attempts, everything. Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Banking in a small town meant she'd seen family dramas before. Of course. Mrs. Matthews, anything else? I need copies of all my statements, going back 2 years, and I want to set up alerts for any access attempts. Back home, I moved through my routine as if nothing had changed. I made lunch, commented on the weather, even asked Richard about his golf game. But while they watched television that evening, I was in my room, scanning documents on the small printer I'd bought and hidden in my closet. Every important paper went digital, uploaded to a cloud account they didn't know existed. Birth certificates, Harold's death certificate, deeds, insurance policies, investment records, years of careful financial planning, now backed up where grasping hands couldn't reach. The USB drives I filled were tiny, easy to hide, one in the lining of my purse, another in a sealed plastic bag in the bottom of my face cream jar, a third tucked into the spine of my favorite book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, because every woman needs her own kind of strength. On Tuesday, while they assumed I was at my book club, I met with Thomas Galloway. He'd been Harold's lawyer and mine, a man who'd seen me through widowhood with dignity. I need to update my will, I said, sliding into his leather chair, and I need to discuss protecting my assets. He leaned forward, silver eyebrows drawing together. Is everything all right, Cora? I told him. Not everything, not the daily humiliations, the gaslighting, the way my daughter looked at me like I was already dead. But enough. I see. He steepled his fingers. We have several options. A revocable trust would protect your assets while maintaining your control. We could also set up a financial power of attorney with someone you trust, not family. Do it all, I said. Whatever keeps my money out of their hands if they try to declare me incompetent." His face darkened. "Are they suggesting—" "Not yet, but it's coming. I can feel it like rain in my bones." We spent 2 hours building legal walls around my future. I named my cousin Sarah in Oregon as my power of attorney. We'd stayed close through letters, and she had no stake in my money. The trust would protect my assets even if someone challenged my mental capacity. "Cora," Thomas said as I prepared to leave, "if things escalate, call me, day or night." I patted his hand. "You're a good man. Thomas, Harold always said so." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was planning for a siege in what should have been my sanctuary. But as I'd learned cataloging historical documents, the most dangerous enemies often shared your blood. At home, I maintained my facade. Weak old woman became my camouflage. I'd fumble for my glasses when I knew exactly where they were. I'd ask Richard to remind me of names I hadn't forgotten. Let them think their gaslighting was working. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Photos of my ransacked drawers, carefully reset to look untouched, voice recordings on my phone when they discussed me in the next room. A detailed journal of every incident backed up digitally each night. My body might be 72, but my mind was sharp as the letter opener Harold gave me for our anniversary, the one I now kept within reach at all times. One evening, while pretending to doze in front of the news, I heard Elaine on the phone. "She has at least 3 million, maybe more. No, she won't discuss it. We need something more concrete. Medical would be best." I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed. The daughter I'd sung to sleep now planned my downfall in the same voice she'd used for bedtime stories to her own children. That night, I stood at my window watching the river flow past. Dark water under February stars. Constant and indifferent, I thought of myself at 35, holding baby Elaine, promising her the world. Where had that child gone? When had love calcified into greed? But sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford. They'd made the rules of engagement. I was just learning to play by them. I thought of something I'd once cataloged, a letter from a Civil War soldier to his sister. When family becomes foe, the heart must become stone until the battle's won. My reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized, not the grieving widow who'd arrived in September, not the hopeful mother seeking reconnection, someone harder, colder, necessary. They wanted to erase me, reduce me to a bank account and a problem to be solved, but I'd spent a lifetime preserving stories. I wouldn't let mine end in their grasping hands. Downstairs, a door slammed, Richard's voice, sharp with frustration, Elaine's response, equally tense. Good. Let them worry. Let them wonder why their docile Mark suddenly seemed less vulnerable. I closed the curtains and returned to my desk, where tomorrow's battle plans waited. They thought they were hunting a deer. They'd trapped a wolf who'd learned patience in the archives of time. The war wasn't over, but for the first time since I'd understood their betrayal, I smiled. Let them come. The theft happened on a Wednesday. I'd hidden the USB in my jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper beneath my mother's pearl necklace. When I checked that evening, the pearls remained, but the USB was gone. They'd gotten sloppy. Tissue paper torn, jewelry scattered, no attempt to hide their invasion. Maybe they thought I was too far gone to notice. Maybe they just didn't care anymore. I sat on my bed, holding the empty space where my insurance had been, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not panic. I was past that. This was resolve, crystallizing like winter ice. Looking for something. Mom? Elaine stood in my doorway, and for the first time, she wasn't pretending concern. My reading glasses, I lied smoothly. I can never keep track of them. Her smile was sharp. Maybe you should see that doctor. Like we discussed, memory issues at your age are perfectly normal, I finished. Thank you for your concern. That night, I activated what I'd called my emergency protocol. From my burner phone, purchased with cash at a CVS 2 towns over, I called Thomas Galloway. They took the bait, I said simply. The decoy USB? Gone, just like we planned. I'd learned from handling historical documents that the most valuable items needed doubles. Copies, decoys. The USB they'd stolen contained financial records. Yes, but from 2018 showing a third of my actual assets. Let them think they'd won. Proceed with Phase 2, Thomas asked. Immediately. Phase 2 meant moving fast. The next morning, while Elaine drove the children to school and Richard attended his golf club meeting, I executed a plan weeks in preparation. First, the banks. 3 institutions, 3 separate transfers. Money moved from accessible accounts into the trust Thomas had created. Not all of it. That would raise alarms, but enough to protect the bulk of my assets. Second, the documentation. I visited a medical clinic in the next county, paying cash for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. The doctor, a young woman who reminded me of Elaine before the greed, put me through 2 hours of tests. Mrs. Matthews, your cognitive function is remarkable for any age, she said, printing the results. Your memory, reasoning, and decision-making capabilities are all well above average. I had her notarize 3 copies, one for Thomas, one for my safe deposit box, one hidden in a place they'd never think to look, inside the dust jacket of Richard's golf tournament trophy display. Third, the apartment. I'd been paying rent on a small unit across town for 6 weeks, using my maiden name. Nothing fancy. A 1-bedroom with good locks and a view of the park. Today I moved in essentials, clothes, medications, copies of all documents, and a new laptop. By noon, I had a sanctuary they knew nothing about. The afternoon required performance art. I returned home to find them ransacking my room with abandon. Drawers pulled out, mattress askew, even the pictures pulled from walls. "Oh," I gasped from the doorway, channeling every frail old lady stereotype. What happened? Were we robbed?" Richard straightened, not even breathing hard from his destruction. "Cora, thank God. We thought someone had broken in. Your room was like this when we got home." The lie came so easily to him. I wondered if he practiced in the mirror. "My room," I let my voice quaver. "But why would anyone—" "Oh no, my mother's jewelry." I rushed to the jewelry box, making a show of checking. "The pearls! Thank goodness they're safe." Elaine appeared, face flushed with effort or frustration. "Mom, is anything missing? Documents, banking information?" I don't know. I can't think. This is all so upsetting." I sank into my chair, letting my hands shake. Why would someone do this? They exchanged glances over my head. Disappointment? Suspicion? I kept my eyes down, playing the part of a confused elderly woman, not the chess master who just castled her king. "We should call the police," I suggested weakly. "No," Richard said too quickly. "I mean, let's make sure something's actually missing first. No need to trouble them unnecessarily." Of course not. Hard to explain to police why their fingerprints were everywhere. That evening, they tried a new approach. Dinner was elaborate. Salmon, asparagus, Elaine's famous lemon tart. The wine flowed freely, though I barely sipped mine. "Mom," Elaine said, reaching for my hand across the table, "we're worried about you. This break-in. What if you'd been home? What if you'd been hurt?" "We think," Richard added, refilling my wine glass, "it might be time to consider giving Elaine financial power of attorney, just for safety. So if anything happens—" "Nothing's going to happen," I interrupted, pulling my hand back. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs." "But, Mom, you've seemed so confused lately, forgetting things, misplacing items, and now this break-in." "Which you said wasn't a break-in," I reminded them, "since nothing was taken." The mask slipped for just a moment. I saw rage flash across Richard's face before he smoothed it away. "We're just trying to help," he said through gritted teeth. "I know," I lied, standing, "and I appreciate it, but I'm tired now. It's been an upsetting day." In my room, my violated, ransacked room, I quietly packed a small bag, medications, a change of clothes, my real documents. Tomorrow, I'd make my move. Tonight, I'd sleep in a battlefield, knowing the enemy was just down the hall. But I wasn't afraid anymore. They'd shown their hand, revealed how desperate they were. The stolen USB would lead them to old accounts, closed years ago. The destruction of my room proved they'd lost patience, gotten reckless. At 11:30 p.m., I heard them arguing downstairs, Elaine's voice, shrill with frustration, Richard's deeper tones, angry and demanding. Good, let them fracture. Let them blame each other for the missing millions they'd never find. I smiled in the darkness. They'd tried to rob me, but they'd already lost. They just didn't know it yet. Tomorrow, I'd disappear like morning mist, but tonight, I lay in my childhood bed one last time, not as their victim, but as their judgment, coming due with compound interest. The courtroom smelled of old wood and disappointment. I sat beside Thomas Galloway, my hands folded calmly in my lap, wearing the navy suit Harold had loved. Across the aisle, Elaine whispered furiously with her lawyer, a shark in Armani who'd taken half their savings as a retainer. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. The competency hearing they'd rushed to file had backfired spectacularly. In their haste to declare me mentally unfit, they'd made crucial mistakes. The doctor they'd hired had examined me for all of 15 minutes. Their evidence was circumstantial at best, malicious at worst. "Your Honor," their lawyer began, his voice oozing false concern. "Mrs. Matthews has shown clear signs of cognitive decline, paranoid delusions about break-ins, inability to manage her daily affairs, confusion about financial matters." "Objection," Thomas said calmly. "I have here a comprehensive cognitive evaluation from Dr. Janet Phillips, conducted just 2 weeks ago, showing Mrs. Matthews scoring in the 95th percentile for her age group." I watched Elaine's face crumble as Thomas presented document after document. Medical records, bank statements showing careful, consistent management, affidavits from neighbors who'd noticed Richard sneaking into my room, security footage from the bank showing him attempting to access my accounts without authorization. "Mrs. Matthews," Judge Morrison addressed me directly, "would you like to make a statement?" I stood, my voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, I'm a 72-year-old woman who made the mistake of trusting family. I have documentation of systematic financial abuse, attempted theft, and what I believe was an orchestrated campaign to make me appear mentally incompetent." From my purse, I withdrew the letter I'd written the night before. My hands didn't shake as I read. "Dear Elaine, you are the child I carried for 9 months, whose fevered forehead I kissed, whose wedding I cried at with joy. But you are also the woman who searched my private papers while I slept, who charged me rent for the privilege of being your mother, who looked at me and saw not the woman who raised you, but a bank account to be emptied. I documented everything, every violation, every lie, every time Richard tried to access my accounts, every staged incident designed to make me question my sanity. I may be old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm certainly not incompetent. You wanted my money so badly you were willing to throw me away to get it. But your father and I didn't save for 40 years to fund your greed. We saved so I could live with dignity and leave a legacy to grandchildren who might remember me with love, not avarice." The courtroom was silent when I finished. Elaine's lawyer tried to object, to claim emotional manipulation, but Judge Morrison cut him off. "I've seen enough. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation." The gavel came down like Judgment Day. But the real blow came an hour later, in the courthouse hallway. Thomas had just handed me copies of the ruling when Federal Marshal Stevens approached Richard. "Richard Dawson? You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted unauthorized access to financial accounts." The investigation I'd triggered weeks ago had borne fruit. Richard's attempt to access my accounts had violated federal banking laws. Worse, they'd discovered he'd done this before, to his own elderly mother, who'd been too ashamed to press charges. "This is your fault," Elaine screamed at me as they handcuffed her husband. "You vindictive witch! He was just trying to help." Help himself to my money, I said quietly. The FBI has the security footage. Elaine, they have the forged documents he prepared. They have proof he's done this before. She lunged at me then, fingers clawed, reaching for my hair, but I stepped aside. All those morning walks had kept me nimble. She stumbled, fell, her designer suit tearing at the knee. "I'm your daughter," she wailed from the floor. "How could you do this to your own daughter?" "You stopped being my daughter the day you decided I was worth more dead than alive," I told her, my voice steady as granite. "I'm just returning the favor." The marshals led Richard away as Elaine sobbed on the courthouse floor. Other people stared, whispered, judged. Good. Let them see what greed had reduced her to. Thomas touched my elbow gently. "Cora, are you all right?" "I'm free," I said, and meant it. That afternoon, I learned the full extent of their downfall. The house mortgaged to the hilt for Richard's failed investments would be foreclosed within months. His arrest triggered clauses in his employment contract, terminating him without severance. The lawyer's fees had drained their savings. Elaine called 17 times that evening. I didn't answer. The messages progressed from rage to bargaining to pitiful pleading. "Mom, please, the children. Think of the children." I did think of them, which is why I'd already set up education trusts in their names, inaccessible to their parents, available when they turned 18. They'd have college funded by a grandmother who loved them, not parents who saw them as pawns. That night, in my little apartment, I opened a bottle of the good wine, the one Harold and I had saved for special occasions. I poured 2 glasses, setting one at the empty place across from me. "We did it, honey," I whispered to the empty chair. "They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed." Outside my window, life went on. Cars passed. People walked dogs. Normal life, which I'd fought so hard to keep. The local news ran the story the next day. "Elderly woman defeats family, plot to steal millions." They used Elaine's booking photo. She'd been arrested for assault after our courthouse encounter. Her face, twisted with rage and running mascara, bore no resemblance to the daughter I'd once known. I turned off the television and returned to my photo albums. There she was at 5, missing her front teeth, grinning over a birthday cake at 16, radiant in her prom dress at 25, glowing in her wedding gown. I closed the album gently. That daughter was gone, had been gone long before I'd realized it. What remained was a stranger who'd worn her face and tried to destroy me with it. But I'd survived. More than survived. I'd won. The price of victory tasted like ash and wine, like freedom and loss intertwined. But as I watched the sun set over my new view, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The price of greed is paid in installments, and I watched each payment come due with the detachment of a historian documenting inevitable collapse. Richard's federal case moved swiftly. The evidence was damning, not just against me, but a pattern spanning years. His elderly mother in Florida, an aunt in Texas, a family friend in Georgia, all women over 70, all trusting, all systematically robbed by the same methods he'd tried on me. The prosecutor called me 3 weeks after his arrest. "Mrs. Matthews, we've uncovered at least 6 victims. Your documentation is the most comprehensive we've ever seen. Would you testify?" "With pleasure," I said. Elaine's attempts to contact me grew desperate. Letters slipped under my apartment door. Flowers delivered with pleading notes. She even sent the children once, appearing at my doorstep on a Saturday morning. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was small, confused. "Mom says you won't talk to us anymore." I knelt to her level, my heart breaking. "That's not true. Sweetheart, I love you and Marcus very much, but sometimes adults have disagreements." "She cries all the time," Marcus whispered, "and Daddy's gone somewhere." I hugged them tight, memorizing their warmth. Then I called a cab and sent them home with a note. "Using the children as weapons is beneath even you. Their trust funds remain intact. Don't contact me again." The foreclosure notice appeared in the newspaper in April. The Victorian house by the river, where I'd foolishly sought family, would be auctioned. Elaine had failed to make payments for 3 months, the money spent on lawyers who couldn't save Richard from federal prison. She broke on a Tuesday evening in May, appearing at my apartment building, wild-eyed and disheveled. The Elaine who'd once coordinated charity galas now wore a stained sweatshirt and desperation-like perfume. "Please!" she screamed up at my window. "I'm losing everything, the house, the cars, the children's school tuition. Please, Mom, just help me." I watched from behind my curtain but didn't answer. She'd made her choices. Every document forged, every lie told, every attempt to declare me incompetent. Those were choices. Building security eventually removed her, but she returned the next day, and the next, until I had to file a restraining order. My own daughter, legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me. The trial began in June. Federal court wood-paneled and solemn, where Richard faced 27 counts of fraud. I testified for 3 hours, my evidence meticulous, my voice never wavering. He presented himself as helpful. I told the court, concerned about the confused old lady. But confusion was his weapon, not my condition. The other victims testified too. Richard's mother, frail but furious, described losing her retirement savings. The aunt from Texas wept as she explained how he'd convinced her she had dementia, then drained her accounts. Elaine attended every day, growing gaunter, her designer clothes replaced by thrift store finds. She stared at me with hollow eyes, as if I were the one who'd betrayed her. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. 25 years federal prison. No possibility of parole for 15. Richard's shoulders sagged as they led him away. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, no longer the confident predator who'd stalked my finances. Elaine waited for me outside the courthouse. The restraining order meant she had to stay across the street, but her voice carried. "I hope you're happy," she screamed. "You've destroyed my life. My children have no father. We're homeless, all because you couldn't share." I stopped, turned, looked at the stranger wearing my daughter's face. "I didn't destroy your life, Elaine. You did. Every choice, every lie, every document Richard forged with your knowledge. You chose greed over love. You chose theft over trust. You chose to see me as a wallet instead of your mother." "But family," she started. "Family doesn't drug their mothers to seem confused. Family doesn't ransack rooms searching for financial documents. Family doesn't file false competency hearings." My voice rose with each word. "You stopped being a family the day you put a price tag on my love." She crumpled then, sobbing on the courthouse steps. Other people walked around her, embarrassed by the display. I felt nothing. The daughter I'd mourned was already gone. This was just the shell, finally understanding the cost of her choices. I walked away, my steps steady, my conscience clear. 2 weeks later, Thomas called with news. Elaine had been arrested for prescription fraud, apparently. She'd been stealing and selling my medications during those months of caring for me. Another felony charge, another consequence. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked gently. "I want her to face every consequence of her actions," I said, just as she wanted me to face hers. The children went to live with Elaine's former sister-in-law, a good woman who'd always disapproved of Richard. I arranged monthly deposits for their care, anonymous but consistent. They'd have what they needed, when they needed it, from a grandmother who loved them enough to protect them from their parents' greed. Summer arrived with its humid embrace. I tended tomatoes on my small balcony, volunteered at the library, rebuilt a life free from toxic entanglements. The money they'd coveted so desperately sat safely in trust, earning interest, waiting to educate grandchildren and support charities that helped elder abuse victims. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think of Elaine as a baby, trusting and innocent in my arms, but that baby was gone, had been gone for years before I'd recognized the monster she'd become. The local news ran one final story: daughter in elder abuse case sentenced to 3 years. Elaine's mugshot showed dead eyes, lank hair, the beauty poisoned by bitterness. She'd lost everything: husband, home, children, freedom, mother, all for money she'd never touch. I clipped the article, filed it with the others. evidence of justice served, of a price paid in full. Then I returned to my peaceful life. No longer looking over my shoulder, no longer questioning my sanity, no longer wondering when family had become enemy. They'd thought me weak, controllable, disposable. They'd learned too late that libraries preserve more than books. They preserve the warriors who guard them. And this warrior had won. The federal prosecutor's office became as familiar as my old library. I arrived each morning with my documented evidence, my testimony sharp as a blade honed by betrayal. Richard's trial had revealed the scope of his crimes, but more victims emerged weekly, drawn by news coverage to finally speak their truth. Mrs. Matthews, assistant UBS. Attorney Sarah Chen addressed me before court one morning. Your meticulous records have become the backbone of this case. 7 more victims have come forward because of your courage. I sat straighter in the witness chair that day, speaking not just for myself, but for every elder he'd defrauded. My voice never wavered as I detailed each forged document, each unauthorized access attempt, each moment they'd tried to paint me as senile while robbing me blind. The defendant told me I was paranoid, I testified, that I was imagining things. Meanwhile, he had already prepared power of attorney documents with a notary he knew, documents I never signed, though he tried to use them at 3 different banks. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, bank records, the famous USB he'd stolen, thinking he'd won, which had led investigators to his previous victims when they traced the old account numbers. His own greed had provided the roadmap to his destruction. Elaine watched from the gallery every day, growing thinner, her hair now gray at the roots. Prison had not been kind to her. She was out on bail pending her own trial, staying with distant relatives who barely tolerated her presence. She'd aged a decade in 6 months, the weight of consequences etching lines that privilege had previously prevented. During a recess, she cornered me in the courthouse bathroom. The restraining order had expired while she was incarcerated, a detail I'd foolishly overlooked. "You did this," she hissed, her breath sour with desperation. "You destroyed everything. The children cry for their father. They ask why Grandma hates them." "I don't hate them," I said calmly, washing my hands. "I hate what you became. There's a difference." "I'm your daughter," the words echoed off cold tile. "Your only child. How can you stand there and—" "You stopped being my daughter the day you drugged my tea to make me seem confused." I met her eyes in the mirror. "Oh yes, I had the test done. Benzodiazepines, low doses, enough to cause confusion, but not enough to kill. Though I wonder, would you have escalated if the competency hearing had failed?" Her face went white. She hadn't known I knew. "Every cup of tea you brought me so lovingly," I continued, drying my hands. "Every concerned comment about my confusion, every staged incident, I documented it all, Elaine. The prosecution has the toxicology reports. We were just what? Just trying to steal $3 million from your mother? Just trying to have me declared incompetent so you could lock me away somewhere while you spent my life savings?" She lunged at me then, nails aimed at my face, but months of stress had made her clumsy while my morning yoga had kept me agile. I sidestepped, and she crashed into the paper towel dispenser. Security rushed in at the noise, finding her on the floor, sobbing incoherently. They helped her up, but I saw the shift in their eyes. Another violent outburst from the defendant's wife, another mark against her in her upcoming trial. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the guard asked me. "Perfect," I said, stepping over Elaine's prone form. "Just washing my hands." The trial's conclusion was anticlimactic. Guilty on all federal counts. The judge, a stern woman who'd seen too many elder abuse cases, delivered a sentence that made the courtroom gasp. 35 years, with mandatory restitution to all victims. Richard's shoulders shook as they led him away. He'd entered the courtroom in an expensive suit his lawyer had procured, still trying to project success. He left in shackles, the reality of decades in federal prison finally penetrating his narcissistic delusion. But my revenge wasn't complete until Elaine's trial 2 months later. The prescription fraud charges had expanded when investigators discovered she'd been selling my medications to fund their lifestyle even before the competency scheme. Worse, the prosecutor had added attempted poisoning charges based on my toxicology evidence. I testified again, this time against my own daughter. The courtroom was packed. Elder abuse had become a hot topic, and our case was the most egregious anyone had seen. She brought me tea every evening, I told the jury, called it our mother-daughter time. I treasured those moments, even as they made me increasingly confused. I thought it was age, stress from their financial pressures. I never imagined my own child was poisoning me to steal my savings. Elaine's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of Richard's influence, a devoted daughter led astray. But the evidence spoke louder. Text messages planning the drugging, searches on her laptop for how to make elderly parents seem incompetent, receipts for the benzos purchased with stolen prescription pads. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years federal prison, no parole for 10. As they handcuffed her, Elaine looked at me one last time. "I hope you die alone," she spat. "I hope you suffer every day knowing you destroyed your own family." "No," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the courtroom. "You destroyed our family the day you chose greed over love. I'm just the survivor who refused to be your victim." They led her away, and I never saw her again. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I'd become something of a symbol, the elderly woman who'd fought back, who'd refused to be silenced or stolen from. "Mrs. Matthews, how does it feel to see justice served?" I looked directly into the cameras, thinking of all the elderly victims watching, all the ones too afraid or ashamed to speak up. "It feels like freedom," I said. "It feels like proof that age doesn't make us helpless, that family connections don't grant immunity to abuse, that we have the right to live our remaining years with dignity, not as ATMs for greedy relatives." "Do you regret?" "I regret trusting blindly. I regret not seeing the signs sooner, but I don't regret protecting myself, my assets or my autonomy, and I don't regret ensuring they face justice for their crimes." I walked away then, past the cameras and questions, into a afternoon bright with possibility. Behind me, the courthouse held the ruins of my former life, a daughter in custody, a son-in-law beginning decades of incarceration, a family destroyed by its own greed. But ahead lay freedom, peace, a life where my tea was just tea, where my confusion was just age, where my money was my own to spend or save or donate as I chose. They'd wanted my fortune so badly they'd sacrificed everything to get it. In the end, they'd gained nothing but iron bars and lifelong regret. My revenge was complete, not through violence or cruelty, but through the cold, impartial machinery of justice I'd set in motion. They'd gambled everything on my weakness. They'd lost to my strength. The morning after Elaine's sentencing dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect Carolina days that makes you grateful to be alive. I stood at my apartment window, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of forgiveness I couldn't quite feel yet. My phone rang. Thomas Galloway's voice was gentle. "It's over, Cora. Really over. How do you feel?" "Empty," I admitted, "and full, like I've won everything and lost everything at once." "That's grief," he said. "You're mourning the daughter you thought you had." He was right. The daughter I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for. She'd been gone long before the trials. Maybe she'd never existed outside my hopeful imagination. I made tea, just tea, no hidden substances, and sat at my small table. The same hands that had once trembled with drug-induced confusion, now steady as stone. The same mind they'd tried to fracture sharp as the morning light. The letters started arriving a week later, from the other victims, thanking me, from strangers who'd seen the news, sharing their own stories of family betrayal, from elderly people across the country who said I'd given them courage to check their own finances, their own teacups, their own trust. I read each one, filing them in a box marked after, because there was definitely a before and after in my life now. Before, when I believed in unconditional love. After, when I learned that conditions were sometimes necessary for survival. 3 weeks later, I got an unexpected call. Emma's guardian, Richard's sister Catherine. "Mrs. Matthews? The children have been asking about you. I know the situation is complicated, but they're struggling to understand. Would you consider supervised visits?" My heart clenched. What have you told them? The truth, adjusted for their age, that their parents made bad choices and have to face consequences, that their grandmother loves them but needed to protect herself. We arranged to meet at a park the following Saturday. Emma and Marcus ran to me and I dropped to my knees, gathering them close. They smelled like sunshine and innocence, untouched by their parents' poison. "Grandma, why did Mommy and Daddy go away?" Marcus asked, his small face serious. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said carefully. "Big ones. And when we hurt people, we have to make amends." "Did they hurt you?" Emma's eyes were too knowing for her age. "Yes, sweetheart, they did." "We won't," she said fiercely. "We promise." I hugged them tighter, believing her. Their trust funds would ensure education, opportunity, a chance to become better than their parents. I'd see them monthly, building a relationship free from manipulation, teaching them that love didn't require surrendering dignity. Summer turned to fall. I returned to volunteering at the library, finding peace among books that told stories of other survivors. I joined a support group for elder abuse victims, sharing my story with those still trapped in their own. "You gave us a roadmap," and one woman told me. "You showed us it's possible to fight back and win." But winning, I learned, wasn't about the money protected or the justice served. It was about the mornings I woke without fear, the tea I drank without suspicion, the decisions I made without seeking permission from people who saw me as less than human. On a cool October evening, I visited Harold's grave for the first time since the ordeal began. I brought flowers, yellow roses, his favorite, and sat on the bench beside his headstone. "I did it, honey," I whispered. "I protected what we built. I stood up to them, but God, the cost." Wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. "You did what you had to do, Cora. I'm proud of you." I smiled through tears, the first I'd allowed myself since that day in court. They weren't tears of regret or weakness, but of release. The burden of revenge achieved, justice served, battles won. As I stood to leave, I noticed another woman at a nearby grave, elderly like me, shoulders shaking with sobs. I recognized the look, fresh grief, raw loss. Without thinking, I walked over. "Are you all right?" I asked gently. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "My son, he wants me to sign papers, says it's for my own good, but something feels wrong." I sat beside her, this stranger who might be me from before. "Trust your instincts," I said, "and get your own lawyer. Never sign anything you don't understand completely." We talked until sunset, and I gave her Thomas's card. Another potential victim armed with knowledge, another elder who might escape the trap. That's become my purpose now. The money Elaine and Richard coveted so desperately funds a legal clinic for seniors. My story, told in courtrooms and community centers, warns others. The daughter who called me paranoid accidentally created an advocate for the very population she'd tried to exploit. I returned to my apartment as darkness fell, but it didn't feel empty anymore. On my mantel sat photos, not of the family who'd betrayed me, but of the lives I'd touched since. The victims who'd found justice, the seniors who'd protected themselves, the grandchildren who still had a chance. My phone buzzed, a text from Emma sent with Catherine's supervision. "Love you, Grandma. See you next Saturday." I smiled, pouring myself a glass of wine. The good stuff, because every day above ground and free was worth celebrating. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one a life living its own story of survival. They'd tried to bury me under confusion and lies, tried to steal not just my money, but my agency, my dignity, my faith in family. They'd failed because they'd underestimated the strength that comes with age, the wisdom that recognizes wolves in sheep's clothing, the fury of a woman who refuses to be anyone's victim. I raised my glass to the window, to the night, to the daughter I'd lost and the life I'd found. To survival, I toasted, to justice, to the steel in our spines when they think we're made of glass. The wine was perfect, aged, complex, worth waiting for, like revenge served at exactly the right temperature, like a life reclaimed from those who'd tried to steal it. I sat in my chair, my castle, my earned peace, and felt Harold's presence like a warm embrace. We'd won. He and I, not the family we'd hoped for, but the dignity we'd deserved. And that, in the end, was everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're hearing this. Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your own experiences and reactions mean the world to me.